And we are back for another episode of The Productivity Show, the #1 podcast on iTunes when it comes to productivity, time management, and efficiency. And today I'm here with my co-host, Brooks Duncan. How are you today, buddy?
I'm great. Last week, I recorded an episode solo with Amy Payne, who is a guest talking about CRMs. And somehow, whenever we skip a live recording, just once, it feels like it's been so long since we've done a recording. So happy to be back with you, Dan.
I'm happy to be back here as well. And today we're going to be talking about GTD apps. And for those who don't know, I'm Tam Pham, founder and CEO of Asian Efficiency. This is my co-host Brooks Duncan, who's the CEO of Asian Efficiency, where we help people become more productive at work and in life. And we always like to start off with some of our favorite productivity resources as of lately. And I know you have 3 of them here today. So Brooks, what are our top recommendations for this episode?
All right. So recommendation number 1 is actually the official GTD setup guides. So a lot of people don't know this, but the David Allen Company actually makes specific setup guides for all sorts of different types of software, including, I think, all, if not almost all of the tools we're going to be talking about today. They actually sell, and they're just $10. They sell guides specifically on how to set up GTD in those apps. So they're a great resource. If you have an app and you want to set up GTD, might as well learn from the master. So that's number 1. Number 2 is called the Elgato Stream Deck. And this is recommended by one of our dojo members, William Hughes. And I'm actually a big fan of this as well. And it's a physical device that you have on your desk with these big buttons. And they're completely programmable, and you can make all sorts of things happen on your computer and different websites and stuff like that, just by pressing buttons. They're actually mainly made for streamers. So people who do live streaming for, say, Twitch or YouTube or all sorts of different live streaming. They're made for that, but they can be used for productivity tools as well. So I'm a big fan of it. So I was happy that William recommended it too. And number 3, also a recommendation from a dojo member named Giacomo, who is often and is currently listening live on this recording, is Miro, which is a virtual whiteboarding tool. So if you want to collaborate with people, if you all want to view the same thing and be able to mark stuff up and discuss, Miro is a great online whiteboarding tool.
Awesome. We'll have links to everything here in the show notes. So if you miss something, don't worry. You can always go to theproductivityshow.com/330. Or if you're listening to us in an app, just swipe and you'll see the links in the show notes as well. All right, let's talk about GTD apps here today. For those of you who are brand new to GTD, you might be wondering, okay, what app do you need, right? What's the recommendation that people have for GTD apps? If you're one of those people, you're in the right place. We're going to be sharing some of our favorite productivity apps specifically around GTD, especially if you're a specific type of user as well. And if you're someone who already is familiar with GTD, you kind of been using it for a while, both maybe work and personal, but you need an app that really works for you and you're not really satisfied with the app that you currently are using, I think you're going to discover some apps that you might want to consider switching to or consider trying out before you make the big switch. And if you're someone who is already a veteran when it comes to GTD, we're going to be sharing some of the advantages and disadvantages of using an app, but also some of the advanced uses behind some of those apps as well. So even if you are not using one of those apps today, or you are, there's something going to be in it for you here as well. A quick shout out to the Productivity Show Plus, or TPS Plus, as we like to call it. This is the premium version of our podcast. If you're not a subscriber yet, what are you waiting for? Go to theproductivityshow.com/plus, and you'll be able to upgrade your experience when it comes to listening to our podcast here, where you get our ads, or where you get our shows ad free. When you subscribe, you also get them a week early. Plus, when you become a subscriber, you also get a specific audio course that's only available for TPS Plus members, and that's all about the T framework, which is our productivity methodology. And it's the only course we've released so far on this particular methodology. So if you're interested in that, plus some other benefits like Ask Me Anything, you get a t-shirt as well when you become a subscriber. Go check it out at theproductivityshow.com/plus, or you can also go to tps.plus and just type that in your browser. All right, Brooks, let's talk about GTD apps here, specifically GTD apps, but why do we need to discuss this episode? Because do you really need an app to use GTD?
Honestly, even though a lot of us, I mean myself, I've been neck deep in GTD apps for years and years and years, as we'll discuss. But really, GTD is a completely tool neutral platform. When the original Getting Things Done book was written, there was really no such thing as a GTD app. The GTD app that, as originally described, was a bunch of file folders that you had, 42 or 43 file folders that you had in your desk, and just something to jot down projects and stuff like that. There was no such thing as a GTD app. So no, you absolutely don't need a GTD app. However, I think for most people, not all people, but for most people, you will get a lot of benefit out of using some sort of technology tool. You can definitely do it with a notebook as well. And I know a lot of our listeners do GTD with a notebook. So not saying that that's not a valid way to do it, but for a lot of us, just having a digital app where you can slice and dice your data, you can see exactly what you need, it's always with you, is really, really beneficial. We've talked a number of times about GTD on the podcast. We talked in TPS309, which was the 5 GTD mistakes almost everyone makes, and Tan and I both have made the mistakes in the past as well. And also TPS322, 5 GTD tips to become a power user. So I personally do use a GTD app, which we're going to get into in a second. But if you want to go analog, no problem.
Yeah, remember when GTD was kind of first released, it was, I believe, in the early 2000s, and we didn't have any smartphones back then, right? And the fact that this system is still available today and really popular shows you that the system is really good, even if you don't have a particular app, right? So in the beginning, people would use pen and paper or whatever worked for them. And that was when the book was released. And I know David Allen was teaching seminars and workshops and doing trainings way before the book was ever released. So think about the late 80s and the early 90s. And so we didn't have any computers really back then for most of us, and also no smartphones whatsoever. So this system is really flexible in that sense. It's kind of like tool agnostic or neutral. And so you can literally pick and choose how you want to use it. Now, today we are going to dive deeper into some of the apps. But again, we want to emphasize that you don't need an app to use GTD or to GTD. And if you want to dive deeper into some of the content that we have in training around GTD, Brooks mentioned already a few episodes. We also have another episode on TPS149 on how to get GTD to work for you. So if you're brand new to GTD or you're kind of like a beginner, you definitely want to check out that episode. And if you're a Dojo member, we have some GTD training in there as well. So go check that out. And if you're not a Dojo member yet, just go to theproductivityshow.com/dojo. Brooks, when it comes to GTD apps, what are some specific things that you think are really important or that someone should look into before they consider using that particular app?
Well, you mentioned the Dojo and TPS Plus, and we record these episodes live in front of the Dojo and TPS Plus. And Giacomo, who I mentioned earlier, in the live stream, says the best GTD app is the one you create for you. So for some people who are super techie like Giacomo, they just build their own systems. But for the rest of us, chances are we're going to be looking at a pre-built system that ideally specializes in GTD. It doesn't have to have all the features that we're going to talk about. In fact, some of the tools that David Allen company sells their setup guides for are not strictly GTD apps, and even some of the ones we mentioned are not officially or strictly GTD apps. But ideally, the app you use should have some way of supporting what we call the big 3 parts of GTD. So number one is projects. So in getting things done parlance, if a task has more than one action item, more than one steps to complete, that's a project. So ideally, you want an app that has some way for you to track projects. So not only can you see your to-dos, things to do, but you can also see a more holistic view of all the things that are related to a certain project. So that's number one, projects. Number two is next actions. So you have a bunch of tasks for a given project, and really one of them and only one of them is the next thing to do in that project. And that is a key GTD concept. And so a GTD app should have some way for you to know of these maybe like 10 things that you have left to do in a project, which is the next action for you to do. So that's the second thing. It should have next actions. And then third is a way to specify context. Now, context is kind of funny because in one of the podcasts I mentioned earlier, TPS309, both Tan, you and I both mentioned, we're not actually big context users anymore. So, and that still stands. I'm assuming you're not a big context user as well. And what GTD generally means by context is the location or the situation you are in where you are able to do this specific task. So if you need to make calls might be a context, or phone might be a context. Some people use energy. So some people might say like high, medium, low energy. So you might want a way to see what are all of the tasks that I can do when I'm feeling low energy, so I can still make progress. So that is a way to track context. So ideally, your GTD app has some way to track context at all. In a perfect world, if we're talking about GTD apps, you want an ability to sync between devices. So you might sit down at your computer and be working on a project, but you also want to be able to see those same projects and next actions on your mobile device. So that is something that didn't exist back in the early days, but it exists in pretty much every GTD app now. So you want to make sure you have that. And finally, the one thing that we would recommend is the ability to get information into your system quickly and easily. So this is called capture in GTD parlance, and you don't want to have to go through a bunch of different steps in order to capture something. If you have an idea in your brain, you want to have some way of getting that into your trusted system, and then you can deal with it later. So those are the things that I think of when I think that's what a GTD app should have.
So those are some things to consider. And I know many of you who are listening right now, you probably already are using an app. You might even consider switching, or you might not even not consider that at all. And you just want to listen and see if there's anything out there that maybe might pique your interest. And I get this question very often where people will say something along the lines of like, hey, when I find out about a new app, like I often find myself just installing it. I have like shiny object syndrome, right? Where like, oh, this sounds really cool, or this interface looks really nice, and I'm going to switch over and give it a try, and only to find out much later that it wasn't really worth their time and effort. And that's one of the things I would really caution for. So as you're listening to this episode, and we're about to dive into our recommendations here, if you're happy with using a particular app right now, and you hear us recommending another app that maybe has a cool feature, really think through whether it's worth your time to switch over, because some people internally like to call me Grandpa Tan because I've been using the same apps and workflows for many, many years, and I haven't really switched as much. And that's because I like my workflow and it's working, and it just works. It's really simple. It works for me. And anytime there's a new app, it might look really cool, or it has like one feature that might be nice, but I would have to redo my whole workflow just to accommodate that one feature. And to me, the golden rule is if I need to switch apps, the next app has to be 10 times better than what I have going on right now. And if that's not the case, then I won't consider switching, because if I already am happy with what I have going on, then why switch, right? So if you are in that camp where you typically follow the shiny object syndrome, as we like to call it, you definitely want to check out episodes 158. So just go to theproductivityshow.com/158, where we talk about how to overcome that and address that. So it's probably be no surprise to many people what our favorite GTD app is. So let's just start with that right away, Brooks. As far as like our top 5 recommendations, what is our number 1 recommendation here?
All right. So our number 1 recommendation, and we had to rank this one number 1 because Tan, you use it, I myself use it, and Marmel all uses it, and it is OmniFocus. So OmniFocus is a tool by the Omni Group. It's available for Mac OS, iOS, Apple Watch, and they have a web version as well. And so what we like about it, there's a lot of things we like about it, and I'll let you speak for yourself, Tam, but what we generally like about it is powerful, but also can be simple as well. You can really customize it. It's one of the more customizable apps out there, and it has the ability to hide the information you don't want to see and just focus on what you should be working on right now. So it's a feature called perspectives. So you don't just get you can see a big list of everything you have going on at once if you want, but you can also narrow it down and just look at things that are due today, or just things that are related to a certain project, or just things that have a certain energy level, and everything else just gets swept away from your view. It also has a great review feature. So if you are doing your weekly reviews, which you definitely should be doing, as we've discussed in those previous GTD episodes, the review feature is really helpful for being able to go through your weekly review really quickly and really easily. So I have been using OmniFocus since February 2012. I went to look at when my first receipt was, and I haven't looked back. It does everything I need it to do. The perspectives, which I mentioned earlier. And I really like the web feature, which started really simple, but they're improving it all the time. It doesn't have custom perspectives yet. But one of the big sticking points for OmniFocus was that people who maybe are Mac or Apple users at home, but couldn't use it at work, now have the ability through the web view to still work with their OmniFocus tasks. So that is why I felt we should put it as number one. How about you, Tim?
Yeah, I've been using it since the KGTD days. So for those who are really old school and remember kind of like the Merlin Mann days, it used to be called Kinkless GTD or KGTD, and that turned into OmniFocus. So that's the app that we all recognize it from today. And I would say OmniFocus kind of gets a bad rap because it's might be a little complicated at first. And when it first came out, it was definitely catered towards the power user. And then over time, they kind of updated their interface to be simpler and simpler and simpler. So if you're someone who has been following kind of like the productivity app for a while, or the whole space for a while, I would say give OmniFocus a new try if you haven't checked it out in the last few years, because I do think now it's simpler than ever. So for example, it's not mandatory to have a context now for anything. You can use it without having any context, and it's really simple and it does everything that you pretty much want, right? Now, the fact that we had to create an OmniFocus course many, many years ago, which was one of our favorite courses ever and also one of our most popular ones, showed you how difficult and challenging it was back then to use it. And thousands of people now use our workflow all over the world to manage their day-to-day. And I would say nowadays, I mean, there's still OmniFocus courses out there, and we definitely recommend you check some of those out. But I think you can now use the tool without actually having to go through a course, right? Whereas something like Devon Think, which is not an task manager here, but just like a reference tool, I still think that tool needs like a particular course you have to go through to really get the most out of it, right? Just like if you want to make the most out of Excel, it would be a good idea to go through a course. Just using it ad hoc is a little challenging, and maybe you pretty much underutilize it, right? And so if you're someone who is like, kind of like list based, I would say this is a great app. If you're someone who is very visual, I don't think this app is really suited for you. There's some other recommendations we have here on this list that might be more suited. So again, OmniFocus is very much list based. So for those who love lists and love making like projects and tasks and just like dump stuff in there, I think this is a really good app to consider. All right, so that is our number one recommendation, OmniFocus. Now let's move on to our second recommendation here, and that is Todoist. So Brooks, why is this number two?
Well, Haley, who's on the live stream, said, I really hope you'll talk about Todoist because that's my favorite one and I have no intention of switching. So it's perfect timing that Todoist is our number two app. Todoist is primarily a web app. Of course, there's mobile devices as well, and you can use it on, mobile apps as well, and you can use it on pretty much all devices. And Todoist is traditionally the one that we always recommended to people if they wanted to use OmniFocus, or if they wanted to use a tool like OmniFocus but didn't have a Mac or couldn't use it at work. Todoist is one of the more popular task management systems out there. While OmniFocus does have a web version, like I said, it's very simple, whereas Todoist is extremely powerful, but also they've put a lot of thought into their UI, and they also keep improving it over and over and over again. It's like constant improvement. So if you want a web-based tool, like a primarily web-based tool, it really is hard to beat Todoist. It integrates with a lot of different email programs and web services, and you can set up a GTD system with it very easily. So like I said, Todoist is what we usually recommend if you want to be truly cross-platform. It's a great tool.
One of the big benefits of Todoist, since it's mostly web-based, is that it makes it really easy to integrate it. So if you're someone who uses a lot of different apps and you want to integrate it with Todoist, there probably is a solution out there already, right? So whether it's a specific calendar, a CRM you want to use, there's just so many ways you can integrate with Todoist. And if you just go to todoist.com/integrations, you can see just all the integrations that they have. Like, I'm just naming a few, like Alexa, Slack, Zoho, Plexi, Microsoft Teams. There's just so many ways to integrate. And that's one of the big benefits of having a web-based tool, right? And now that we've been a few years into it, I had a really interesting insight on Todoist because as Asian Efficiency, we were selling our OmniFocus course. And one of the first things I noticed around 2013, 2014 is we started getting a lot of emails from course people or course users. And they were asking, hey, I'm using Mac at home, but I need Windows at work. Like, what would you recommend that I use? Because I really love OmniFocus, but I need something that I can use cross-platform. And this is when Todoist really came up to us and we said, this is the number one recommendation that we have for you. And so we had a kind of like a sneaky insight on this that I think no one else had, because we were selling so many courses back then around OmniFocus that we could kind of see like where OmniFocus was at stacked compared to other task managers. And we start to notice like this is definitely the future. Most people are going to be cross-platform. And so this is the recommendation that we eventually discovered that I think works best. And again, I'm most impressed by the integration of this. So if you're someone who has to be cross-platform, like you have like a Samsung tablet or something, you use Windows at work, and then you have like a Mac or like an iPhone, I would recommend Todoist as the app for you to use going forward.
Scott in the live stream is a big Todoist fan, and he says that Todoist alarms and adding to your calendar are great features. This is something that people ask about with OmniFocus all the time. Is there a way you can have OmniFocus add to your calendar? And used to be able to do it sort of, but not really anymore. But Todoist has that built in, and their alarms are great too. So yeah, Todoist, you really honestly can't go wrong. We could have made Todoist number 1 and OmniFocus number 2, and I would have been totally comfortable with that. Just so happens that we use OmniFocus, so that's why it won.
I don't know if I would be comfortable with that, but I can see your point. All right. So again, that is our second recommendation here, Todoist. And again, we'll have links to all of the recommendations here in the show notes as well. Let's move on to recommendation number 3 here. And if you are a Mac user, this is no surprise, and that is Things, specifically Things version 3. That's the latest right now. If you've been following productivity for a while or following the app space and you've ever considered like OmniFocus, then you probably have seen Things as well. There was always like this big warfare between OmniFocus users and Things users, where even to this day, when you join the dojo forum, you'll see people asking, hey, should I go with Things or should I go with OmniFocus? And everyone has an opinion about which one you should use. So Brooks, why is this number 3 here?
Yeah, it's funny if you listen to, and the reason we, in a perfect world, all of the tools we talk about would be totally cross-platform, but it's just an unfortunate truth that for like GTD native apps, there just are more great apps, I guess I should say, on the Apple ecosystem than others, not including web-based ones. So it's inevitable that we're going to talk about a few Apple only. So very sorry, Windows/Android folks. We do love you, but we have to do some Apple tools here. And Things, it's funny if you listen to a lot of the kind of more Apple focused podcasts and read blogs and stuff like that. It's funny watching people over time swing back and forth between the two. Like you said, OmniFocus was the 800-pound gorilla, and then Things released Things 3, which had a great new design and some great design choices. And a lot of people swung to Things, and then OmniFocus kind of made some gains, and people swung back. So it's kind of funny. It's kind of funny people doing the shiny object syndrome thing. But Things really does have a lot of fans. And I think a lot of it comes down to, like I said, the UI. It has a really nice, clean UI. OmniFocus has made a lot of strides in that area, but I think it's still not as nice looking as Things. It also has features called you have a lot more flexibility too. It has subheadings and sections, so you can break up your tasks kind of the way that makes sense to you versus a more rigid structure with a tool like OmniFocus. Also has great views like upcoming and today. So yeah, Things, you can't really go wrong with Things as well. The knock against it used to be the lack of sync, but now that isn't a problem anymore. So it's a really popular Mac app that I know a lot of Dojo members and the Productivity Show listeners are big fans of.
If you're someone who is considering OmniFocus and Things, I think the big differentiator is the UI, or the user interface, or in other words, design. I think Things looks prettier and therefore is somewhat easier to use. But the disadvantage of that is that it doesn't have a lot of the power features that OmniFocus has. So the way I would recommend this is, if you're brand new to GTD and just want something really simple, I think Things is a great entryway, especially if you're a Mac only or if you're just using the Apple ecosystem, right? Now, if you are cross-platform, I would immediately say, hey, just go use Todoist because now you're covered in all areas. But if you're someone who is typically a little bit more advanced, you like to make lists as well, you're a little bit more tech savvy, I think OmniFocus is the way to go for many of you who are in that camp. So that's kind of like how I look at it. Even to this day, I think Things looks much better and it's just prettier. And if that's really important to you, then go with Things. But if you're someone who needs power user features, likes to customize things, has no problem with like even scripting stuff or like going really advanced, then OmniFocus is the way to go. So those are just some ways I like to differentiate between the apps here. So again, there's no right or wrong app here, right? It really just depends on your use case. So again, that is our third recommendation here, and that is Things. Now for a fourth recommendation, if you're someone who is very visual and needs something cross-platform, I think this is the recommendation that I think will resonate with you the most, and that is Trello. So Trello is technically a Kanban app where you have like Kanban boards, lists, and cards. It's mostly web-based as well. You do have specific apps, but it really started off web-based and kind of like turned into an app on other platforms like web, iOS, and Android. And again, if you are a visual person, I think this is the recommendation I think you should go with, because you actually move stuff from left to right, right? So if you're like someone who is very visual and you like to see where things are at, instead of using tags or instead of using context or just having something binary as like in progress or done, you can have like multiple boards and multiple progressions or swim lanes, as some people call them. And it makes it very visual and easy to see where things are at. And so that is our fourth recommendation here. Brooks, are you a Trello user at all?
We use it Trello a little bit. Have used it in the past, and I've used it with collaborating with different people. It is a great app. Like you said, it's not strictly a GTD app, but we wanted to mention it because a lot of people do use Trello for GTD, and I've known people, I know you've known people too, who just shudder at the even concept of task management apps. Like the concept of them using something like OmniFocus or even Todoist is just like, it's just not the way their brain works. And it actually makes it harder for them to do their work because they just kind of like, they just physically reject this sort of thing. But they love Trello. They love this almost tactile feeling of dragging things around and having those cards. And there's lots of information online about how to set up a GTD system in Trello. David Allen Company even sells one of their setup guides for using Trello. So there's a lot of information for how you can use it. And if you have struggled with this concept of using a task manager in general, I would seriously look at Trello.
Again, if you're a visual person, this is the go-to solution. And if you're someone who doesn't like lists, I think this is also your go-to solution. And just like Todoist, because Trello started off as a web-based app, it has a lot of integrations available. It's really easy to automate a lot of different things, which allows Todoist to be automated as well, because they have all these integrations that are available. So you can hook things up with Zapier or if this, then that. And it makes it so much easier to automate certain things. So for example, you could say, hey, anytime I move something to done, trigger something so that something else happens somewhere else, right? And so if you want that kind of automation secretly as well, I think this is another solution that you want to consider. But again, if you are not familiar with Kanban boards whatsoever, I would say that you probably want to watch like a few YouTube videos just to kind of get the idea. But it's actually really simple and easy to learn. And again, if you are more visual oriented, but don't necessarily need like super, super pretty graphics, I think this is the solution that you want to consider. So again, that is Trello, our fourth recommendation here. All right, let's move on to recommendation number 5 here. I know we've been talking a lot about, Mac apps and Apple ecosystems, stuff that is web-based, but we also know we have a lot of Windows users here and Windows-only users. And you might be thinking, man, Brooks and Tan always talk about Apple and Mac, and where are we? Are we just like ignored? And the answer is no. Unfortunately, it's just the reality, in my opinion, that some of the best productivity apps are mostly on the Apple ecosystem and then web-based or cross-platform. But there are very few that are Microsoft only and really, really good too. But we do have a 5th recommendation here, and that is Microsoft Outlook and To Do, which obviously is available on Windows, but also on Mac, iOS, Android, and web. And Brooks, I know we want to put this in here specifically at number 5, but would you mind sharing some context around it?
Yeah, people are like, Outlook as a GTD app, get out of here. And for years and years and years, like I said, the David Allen Company has sold a setup guide for Outlook, but I think and you've definitely always been able to use Outlook in a GTD system. A lot of people use it, they'll set up folders with the context and all that sort of stuff and kind of fake a productivity task management system by dragging around emails in different folders and stuff like that. Something you can definitely do, but I think it's the addition of Microsoft To Do, which is as part of the Office 365 setup, that really makes it a more doable setup. And we wanted to include Office 365, Outlook, and To Do because for a lot of people, they don't, they hear about all these great apps, but they just have no ability to install and use them. Their IT has their computer locked down. They're maybe not even allowed to store things in these web-based systems. And for them, it's like, okay, what am I supposed to do now? Well, if you're already in the Office ecosystem, you can make up a very good GTD-like setup using these tools. So you can have, you can flag an email in Outlook and it just automatically appears in To Do, which you kind of like almost like an inbox, a GTD inbox scenario. You can set up views and lists to be able to simulate projects and that sort of thing. There's the up next view to be able to see what the next actions are. Like there's a bunch of different ways that you can implement To Do as part of a GTD system. Now, we don't strictly take you through that we have a course on Outlook called Optimize Outlook, but now that I'm saying these words, that would be a great update to the product to add here's how you set up GTD in Outlook and Microsoft To Do. So the second I finish talking, I'm going to write that down to add it as a future update. But we do have a lot of great Outlook productivity tips. So we'll have a link in the show notes to optimize Outlook. But if you're in the Office 365 ecosystem, you can't install extra system. You know how it is when you work in these companies. Happy IT equals happy life. Definitely look at setting up a system in Outlook and To Do, it can definitely be done.
Absolutely. So that is our fifth recommendation here. If you want to check out Optimize Outlook, you can also go to theproductivityshow.com/Outlook or just look for the link in the show notes as well. Now, one of the cool things about our jobs, Brooks, is that we get to test a lot of different apps, and a lot of apps don't make it into the final list here. So we do wanted to mention a couple other apps that are kind of like honorable mentions. So a few of them include To Do. So you would spell it as number 2 and then DO, so To Do. That's an app that we really like, and a lot of Dojo members seem to really like as well. Nosby is another one, which is one of the oldest apps available and still out there, and really great and very comprehensive. Another one is Nirvana. You also want to check out Asana, which is a little bit more team focused, but you can definitely make a GTD worthwhile. Another one is Facile Things, and then Pocket Informants, which is kind of like, I would kind of even call that OmniFocus on steroids. I think Pocket Informant is like really, really powerful. It's like even more powerful than OmniFocus. At the same time, it will scare off a lot of people. And I know Giacomo here on the live stream really likes Coda. So that's kind of a newer app. When I was at the GTD Summit last year, they made Coda one of the speakers, or the founder was one of the speakers. And so they kind of like indirectly endorsed it in a way. So it's not an official recommendation, but the fact that that was the only app that they allowed on stage to talk about GTD and how it worked within Coda, I think was kind of like a subtle endorsement. So you definitely want to check out Coda as well, spelled CODA. As always, we'd like to end our episodes with something that you can take action on, because we are known to make things simple and actionable, whether it's our podcast, our blog, or some of the courses that you get from us. And so if you are this far into this episode, you're probably thinking, okay, I have an idea which app I want to pursue or want to check out. And we would say, hey, go check out that app based on our recommendations of the 5 that we've listed here. I know there's something in it for you here. So if there's a specific need that you have, or there's something that really stood out to you, go check it out. We'll have links to all of the apps here in the show notes as well. Give it a free trial, download it, and try it out on a really small project to see if you actually like it. We wouldn't say go all in just yet. Just give it a demo, give it a try on a small project, and just see what happens. If you fall in love with it, then consider it. But if you don't, hey, you didn't waste too much time, okay? And if you want to learn more about how to use specific apps and have other productivity training, you should consider joining the dojo, which you can go to theproductivityshow.com/dojo. And we'll have links to all of the stuff that we talked about today in the show notes, and you can go to theproductivityshow.com/330.